Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn Tosfos Dibur Maskil. V'chi oimrim leila adam chatei b'shvil sheyiske chavercha. Let's begin. V'chi oimrim leila adam chatei b'shvil sheyiske chavercha. Over here in the Gemara, this was the question presented by Rav Sheshes. Rav Shilai explained that the case where Rav Bibi Bar Abaya has a question is when an individual placed dough in the oven on Shabbos b'shoigig, by accident, and wasn't aware that he did this by accident, and continued in that state of unawareness, and apparently he went off somewhere. Another individual who observed this sees that this person put the bread in the oven and it's going to bake soon, and that will lead to an Isur Torah. And the question is, did they permit this other individual to remove the bread from the oven before his fellow comes to an Isur Chiyuv Chatas or not? The issue is that removing bread from an oven is an Isur D'Rabbanan. So did they permit him to do an Isur D'Rabbanan to benefit his friend that he doesn't come to a Chiyuv Chatas or not? So that's how Rab Shilai explained the question of Rav Bibi Bar Abaya. To this, Rav Sheshes commented, do we ever tell one person to do an Avera and other that his fellow benefit? There's a rule that we don't do such a thing. This is what Tosfos is going to focus on. And just to point out, it's important to realize this, that Tosfos is not going to be comparing other cases to our case. He's going to be challenging this statement, because Rav Sheshes presented this as a general statement. Do we tell a person to sin so that his fellow benefit? Rav Sheshes presented it as a regular general statement that's applicable. It's a principle. It's applicable, it seems, anywhere. And Tosfos is going to challenge that. So let's begin. This that the Gemara says in Perek B'chol Ma'arvin. It's a Perek in Eruvin. Rebbe holds it is noyach, it is okay, it is good for a Talmud Chacham that is to do a small Isser, now Amorit shouldn't do a great Isser. The story over there is that a Talmud Chacham told an Amoritz that he could take from his fig tree. Now, the din is that if a person eats from produce without giving Meiser, he's Chayav Misa. And the person cannot give Meiser while the fruit or vegetables are still attached to the ground or to the tree. So the Chaver clearly did not give Meiser on these figs because they were being picked from the tree. The din is that if somebody else overhears this, he could assume that the Chaver, the Talmud Chacham, gave Meiser, and he could also eat from these figs without giving Meiser. And what we say is that although a person is supposed to give Meiser, when he's giving Meiser, let's say in a pile of figs, he should take the Meiser from within that pile itself, which is called a Min HaMukaf, and he should not give Meiser Shaloi Min HaMukaf. He shouldn't take from a different pile of figs and have in mind this pile. Nevertheless, we say the Talmud Chacham certainly gave Meiser from a different pile on these, so that the Amarit should not come to eat Tevel, which is a Isser Misa. So we assume that the Chaver gave the Meiser Shalom Min HaMukaf, which is considered something which we don't do, to avoid that the Amarit should do a greater Isser of eating Tevel. And Rebbe says, because Rebbe holds that Neichol Chaver, it's Noach for the Chaver, for the Talmud Chacham, the Levet Isur Klila, that he should do a small Isur, V'le Levet Amaretz Isur Rabban, the Amaret should not do a great Isur. So how could Rav Sheshes say as a general statement, V'chi Oimrim Leila Adam Chatei B'shvil Sheyiske Chavercha, does one person sin for the benefit of another? Here we say that a Talmud Chacham would sin for the benefit of his fellow. He'll do a small sin so that his fellow, the Amaretz, doesn't do a great sin. So Tosfos explains, Hasam over there is it's in order that the Amaretz should not eat Tevel through him. It's not a case that the Talmud Chacham is doing a small Avera for himself to benefit the Amaretz from doing a large Avera. But rather it's the Talmud Chacham is doing a small Avera for himself rather than being the cause for the Amaretz for doing a great Avera. So in other words, it's the Chaver really looking out for himself on some level. It's him doing a small Avera instead of him leading the Amaretz to do a great Avera. Why is it he led the Amaretz? The Omer lay, because he's told the Amaretz Malay L'chal Kalkala, fill for yourself a basket shel te'enim of figs, mitei nasi for my figs. He told the Amaretz to do it, so he would have been a part of that Aver of the Amaretz. But over here, Shalei Nasa Israel Yodi, where the Israel wasn't done through him, the other person put the dough in the oven. This individual came afterwards. We don't tell a person to do an Avera, I feel the Isser Kal, even if it's a small Avera of an Isser D'Rabbanan, removing bread from the oven, that his fellow shouldn't come with the Isser Chamer to a great Avera, a Chiyuv Chatas of baking and Shabbos. So Tosfos over here basically explained that this rule of will we do such a thing Doesn't apply in the case of the chaver and the amaretz, because it wasn't the chaver doing it for the amaretz. In a way, he was doing it for himself, because he was the cause of the amaretz doing that avera. Now Rivas explains a side point. Even for the person himself who attached it, we can't resolve from there that it's permitted. You would think that, look, the chaver did a small avera to avoid causing the amaretz to do a greater avera. That would indicate that an individual could remove his own piece of dough from the oven so that he doesn't come to a greater avera. He could do a small avera to avoid a greater avera, just like the chaver is doing a small avera. He's being mafresh ma'aser shalem and amukuf to avoid a greater avera that he would cause. Says Tosfos, we cannot learn from that case to our case. The hasam adayin le'nasa iser. Over there, the iser was not yet done. The amaretz didn't yet eat tevel. So, iser kal, it's better that a small avera should be done. Iser chamer al yadin. A great avera shouldn't be done. So these are either an iser kal is going to be done or an iser chamer. We say do an iser kal, then be the cause of iser chamer. But over here, a ma'aser shel iser kvar nasa. By us, the ma'aser of the greater iser was already done. It's not let's do a small one instead of doing a big one. The big one is already done. He already put the dough in the oven. So the ma'aser iser was already done. It's going to happen on its own, the iser. So layasa afilu iser kal biyadayim. We don't tell a person go ahead and do an iser kal biyadayim to actively do another avera in order to avoid an avera that's going to happen. So in other words, what Tosfos explained here is it's possible to distinguish between that case and other case. In our case, in the sense that over there we're saying do a small avera instead of being done a big avera. So if neither of them were done yet, so we say that doing the Isser B'Yadayim should be in a small avera rather than the greater one. But in our case, the Isser B'Yadayim of the big avera was already done. He already put the bread in the oven. So in such a case, we don't necessarily say do a small avera so that the big avera is not complete. In order to avoid completing an avera, we don't necessarily say do an Isser B'Yadayim. Now Tosfos continues and asks a question again on this rule that would we tell somebody to do an avera to benefit his fellow even with a bigger avera? That said, it says in Perek HaSheleach, regarding individual that's half free and half slave, he was owned by two masters and one of them freed him, so now he's half free and half slave, and he's unable to marry a free woman because he's half slave. He can't marry a slave woman because he's half free. So they force his master and he has to make him to be a free man. And even though the Bahai Pirka in that parak, Rabbi Yehuda said, anybody that frees a slave over Basay, he's going against the mitzvahs say the La'ilam Behem Tavedu of the La'ilam Behem Tavedu. You should work them forever, never to free a Eved Knani. So how come over there, regarding the Eved Knani that's half free and half slave, we say the master should do an avera of freeing the slave so that the slave could do a big mitzvah of getting married? Why do we see over there that it doesn't fit with this principle? Because we say, we tell the master, sin, free him, be over the mitzvah say of La'ilam Bem Tavedu, in order that your slave should do a great mitzvah of Puravu. Says Tosfos, shiny Puruvia. This is not a case of small versus big. This is small versus tremendously big. It's disproportionately greater than a regular situation. Shiny Puruvia is different. The mitzvah rabbi, because it's a great mitzvah. The Mishani, just like the Gemara answers Hassam over there, Rabbi Lezer, regarding Rabbi Lezer, Shenichnas Beis HaMedrash, there's a story over there in the Gemara. Rabbi Lezer entered the Beis HaMedrash. He didn't find the minion of 10. There was only 9 people. And he freed a slave in order that he should complete the minion. Because when Eved Kanani is free, he becomes a complete Yid. So he freed a slave to make a minion. The Gemara explains over there how was he permitted. Mitzvah the Rabbim shiny. A mitzvah of the public is different. So we see over there this idea that for a mitzvah of a Rabbim, something out of the ordinary, we make an exception. So too for Puravu, it's a mitzvah rabbah, we make an exception. So in other words, Tosfos is saying this principle of we don't say do a small mitzvah avera for the benefit of your fellow. That applies in a general situation. But we're talking about a benefit that's disproportionately great, like Puravu, or like we mentioned now, mitzvah derabim, then we will tell a person do an avera for such a great benefit. Furthermore, we can answer the dafka hechad the pasha, specifically where the person was negligent. Ka'amr, do we say this whole principle that we would not tell a person to do a small avera for the benefit of his fellow, even if it's a greater avera, it's under a specific umbrella, which is when the individual that's going to do the greater avera was negligent. So then we say the person shouldn't do a small avera for the benefit of his fellow, even if it's a large avera, if his fellow was negligent. And that's in our case. Our case, he was negligent. He did an Isser on Shabbos. And whereas in the case that we're just presenting, of the Chetzei Eved, Chetzei Ben Chayrin, there's no negligence. Somebody freed him. So since there's no negligence, when there's no negligence, we say, do a small avera to benefit your fellow from something big. The Asi Shaper, according to this answer, that it doesn't apply if it's not a pshia, if there's no negligence, it also now goes well. Hadar Minan, this that we say, Bereish Tamid Nishchat, at the beginning of Parak Tamid Nishchat, in Mesachtet Pesachim, the Asi Asay the Pesach, that the mitzvah Asay of Pesach comes, Sheyesh Bekaris, which has in it the punishment of Karis, V'dachi Asay Dashlama, it pushes off a mitzvah Asay of Ashlama. V'ka'avri Ka'anim Ba'asay Dashlama, and the Ka'anim will be over the Asay of Ashlama. We'll explain in a moment what this is, then we'll read it again. And they bring for the Mechusar Kippurim, the person is missing a carbon, kaparasi, his carbon, in order they should bring his carbon Pesach. The case over there is, the din is that a person, in order to eat kachim, after a period of tumas, certain tumas, he's obligated to bring a carbon. Now the din is that all karbanos, except for the carbon Pesach, all karbanos need to be brought before the second carbon tamid of the day. So here we have an individual who is Mechusar Kippurim, he needed to bring a carbon in order to partake from kachim, and he didn't. The carbon tamid was brought already. He didn't bring his carbon, and now it's erev Pesach. So if the carbon tamid, if he doesn't bring his carbon, he can't partake in the carbon Pesach. The din is we tell the kehanim, we tell the kehanim, a different individual, bring for this person his carbon, even though you're going to be over a mitzvah of Allah Hashlim Kol HaKarbonos Kulam, that the last carbon should be a carbon tamid. Today, bring a carbon for this individual after the carbon tamid. You do an avera, we tell the kohen, know that your fellow should benefit. He should be able to do the great mitzvah of carbon Pesach, which is tied into karbis. We're bringing out how it's a big mitzvah. Let's see that one more time inside. V'asi Shaper goes well. Hadar Minan Bereish Tamid Nishchat. This that we say at the beginning of Parak Tamid Nishchat in Pesachim. The Asi Asay the Pesach, that the mitzvah Asay of Pesach, of carbon Pesach comes. Sheyesh Bekaris, which has an Karis, which reflects that it's a great mitzvah. V'dachi Asay Dashlama, and it pushes off the mitzvah Asay Dashlama. And who's being over the mitzvah Asay? V'ka'avri kehanim. The kehanim are over by Asay in the mitzvah Asay Dashlama, that the last carbon has to be a carbon tamid. They bring the carbon for this individual is mechusar kippurim. He's missing a carbon kaparasei. They bring for him his kapara, his carbon, in order that he should bring a pesach. They're doing something for his benefit. Now it makes sense because he wasn't negligent, and it's explained in the Mepharshim why isn't it negligent that he didn't bring his carbon on time. V'chein the perik basur Erevin, also in the last perik of Erevin it says kohen sheninsa bayabel, a kohen that had on him a growth, and it's a part of his body that he's unable to reach it and remove it. And it's on Shabbos, where it's also to remove it. So his fellow takes it off for him with his teeth, so it should be through a shinui. Even though it's a shvus, so he tells the other kohen to do a shvus to benefit the kohen with the abelis, so he could do the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. So there we have the two cases where the reason there it's permitted is because there was no pesheya. The person wasn't pesheya, like Mepharshim explained the reason when he didn't bring his carbon on time. And this individual was certainly not pesheya, that he had a growth on his body. Regarding the case where a woman is half slave and half free, where people were noig with her minig hefker and they were doing averis of znus. And in Perek Shalech it says that they forced the master to free her. So the question is, why did they're telling the master to do an avera, which is free your slave, we said you're not permitted to, in order to benefit others that are doing an avera with this woman, an avera of znus. Says Tosfos, the reason is because this woman was promiscuous. She was seeking out this avera of znus. So and therefore the people that were nichshel in the avera are similar to anusim, so they're not considered pesheya. And we just explained, according to the second answer, that under the umbrella of pshia, is the only under the umbrella of pshia do we say don't do an avera in order to avoid your fellow who is negligent from doing a greater avera. But if there's no negligence, no pshia, we certainly tell a person to do a small avera to benefit his fellow, or we do. And also according to our first answer, that there's the exception to this rule is if it's a great mitzvah, mitzvah rabbah or mitzvah derabah, and this is also mitzvah derabah because the rabbim were being nichshel in znus with this shifcha. So to summarize the Tosfos, in our Gemara, we presented a principle. Do we tell one person to do an avera in order that his fellow benefit and not do a greater avera? Absheshis was saying it that we most certainly don't. And Tosfos came and presented cases where we do. So we explained that this principle does not apply everywhere. And the explanation is, number one, it doesn't apply if the person himself is tied into the bigger avera. So he's doing a small avera to help himself from avoiding a greater avera, like the case of the Talmud Chacham, that told the Amoritz to eat from the figs. A second exception would be if the mitzvah that's being discussed, the greater one, is disproportionately greater, like Puravu or Mitzvah Derabim. And the third explanation we gave is that this whole rule, that we wouldn't tell one person to do an Avera to benefit his fellow, is exclusively and specifically when his fellow was being negligent. But if he wasn't negligent, then Oimrim v'Oimrim, we certainly do tell a person to do a small Avera to benefit his fellow.